Next speaker is Colin Kelly, who will be talking about using the law to protect water resources in the U.S. So he is I'm looking through my sheet here. He's the senior staff attorney at Orange County Coastkeeper, and that's an organization that protects water resources in Orange County, just south of LA County in California. So he's involved in these water things, testifying in front of state agencies, doing litigation, supervising the legal department there, permit negotiations, and et cetera. He's involved with these issues on a day-by-day basis. So take it away, Colin.
All right, thank you, Dean, and thank you for inviting me to this, and happy Earth Day to everybody. So there's a PowerPoint presentation that I prepared as well that should be able to be seen on your screen by the co-host. So I just thought I'd briefly talk a little bit about what it is that I do and who I am. So I am the senior staff attorney for Orange County Coastkeeper, Inland Empire Waterkeeper, and also Coachella Valley Waterkeeper. We're part of the International Waterkeeper Alliance of about, I think it's 400 now, give or take, around the world. A lot of them are in the United States, but these are local organizations that have their own 501c3, and they are affiliates of the Waterkeeper Alliance. They have a brand. They're able to use the Waterkeeper name, the logo, things like that, and maintain certain standards that all waterkeepers have to do. One of which is, have permanent staff. So Coastkeeper's been around for 20 years. This is our 21st year, and I have been with Orange County Coastkeeper since 2007 as a legal intern, and then I was hired on as the staff attorney, the first staff attorney in 2009, starting in 2010. So I've been there a long time. And my day-to-day work is water quality based, both advocacy before the State Water Resources Control Board in Sacramento and the regional boards throughout the state. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, as well as enforcement. Generally, we bring enforcement of the Clean Water Act, but we also do some work with making sure public access is open and available. So if we can go to the second slide, that's a little bit about what I am, what I do. I'm not a private attorney, so but I am a public nonprofit attorney. So if anybody has any information, any concerns, please follow up. You can visit coastkeeper.org, and our contact information is there. My email's colin@coastkeeper.org. If you see something, it's like the New York see something, say something. Go ahead and let us know if you have any concerns, and we can see what we can do about it. Our jurisdiction's very large. We went over the Waterkeeper Alliance. The other thing to remember is that there is something called the California Coastkeeper Alliance. We are a member of that organization, and they cover statewide issues. So if there's something, if you're listening or watching this and you don't have something in Orange County, Riverside, or San Bernardino, you live in San Luis Obispo, San Diego, San Francisco, there are other similar organizations that cover those jurisdictions. Visit CaliforniaCoastkeeperAlliance.org, cacoastkeeper.org, and you can find your local keeper there. They're a really good resource if you have any questions. We could go to the next one. So the identifying the problem. So this is on how to use the law to protect water quality. Well, there's a lot of different types of water quality, right? So this just sort of breaks down what kind of field you're in, because the regulations are really different, and who you would turn to can be very different. So first you have to identify what problem do I have? Is the problem that I have surface water related? Is there a construction site and there's really nasty water coming from it, and I'm concerned about what that's doing to what's generally in the industry called receiving water? That would be a creek, river, bay, estuary. The picture on the right, that is a picture of a location in the Inland Empire. That is a clay manufacturing facility. We took them to court recently. We're successful in that. And what that facility does, and it's interesting when you do this kind of work, you are exposed to industries you had no idea existed. So this is a company that takes bricks and crushes them and puts them on a conveyor belt and puts this clay dust into, which is very fine, can be very, very fine, into big piles. And so when it rains, if you don't protect that pile well enough, the product, which is ground up bricks or clay, goes into a storm drain, and the storm drain into a creek. That creek was one of the major tributaries to the Santa Ana River. So what you're seeing in the photo is clay. It's particles, clay particles, which are especially harmful because they create like a swimming pool effect. When they go into a creek, bay, or estuary, they create a fine layer. And then when it dries out, and this is, if let's say it's an ephemeral stream, when it dries out, the next time it rains, it acts like a hose. It acts like a swimming pool. It's like concrete. And so water just flushes faster. It can be increased speed, erosion. It also can cover things like fish eggs. So when you see something, you might not know why it's harmful, but especially if you can actually observe that there's pollution, because oftentimes you can't look at water and say, wow, there's too much copper in there. But you can say, water doesn't look brown. So I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do about that. We have some info about that. So that's surface water. You also have groundwater, and then you have drinking water. So we use in Southern California a lot of groundwater for drinking, but there might be other purposes for groundwater. And there's some other resources that I'm going to get into there. So then we have to say, okay, what do I do? Well, the first thing you should do is, we're extremely lucky. Nowhere in the history of the planet have people been so blessed as to have what's probably the most effective, best camera you've ever had at your fingertips with your cell phone. So cell phones generally have the ability to capture pollution in real time, and video pollution, so you videotaping it, can be very effective. Especially you need to observe it reach something. So reach a storm drain like you're seeing in this photo, reach a creek, reach something that takes it somewhere else. That can be important for a regulator. So the other important thing with cell phones is that they can have metadata on them. So you'll see, or very high-end cameras might have this too. So you'll take a photograph and it will tell you not only the time, but it'll tell you the location, the date, some very important things that can geotag that photograph to a place on a map and a space in time. That can make it easier for establishing evidence, right? Not only if an organization like Waterkeeper or Coastkeeper does something, but also the state. It also is good for you to observe, make observations and write it down. If you're going to tell a regulator or tell Coastkeeper or tell somebody, it's good after you see something, jot it down, your notes, right? That's also good evidence. But also include things like, is it discolored? Does it smell? You're not going to get that in a photograph, but I've seen many discharges that have a really strong odor to them. Whether it's a manure odor or like a gasoline odor, that's not going to come across except if you write it. And what effects did it have on the water body? So could you say, for this example of the photograph, you can look upstream and say, it looks like a little cloudy, it's a rainy day, things happen, creeks you can't see to the bottom of a lot of creeks, especially in a storm, but you can say it's much cloudier after this discharge reached the water than it was before. That's very useful. So I'll give you another example. I'm a bad neighbor for the people that we are around at work, at our office, because I know these things and I have my camera on me and with my phone. And so if I do see something, I photograph it and I send it to the city. Um, I've seen some pretty surprising things. Water shooting out of places that should be dry. And if you report it to a city, cities have their own responsibilities under state and federal law to respond if somebody calls them to a complaint of some discharge from a facility going into a storm drain. If they fail to do that, they can get in an enforcement action against them by the state of California. They have to log when they get that. So a good first person to call if you see something is call the city and call the works department, public works department. You are not going to always get what you think. I work in Costa Mesa. I have called them on occasion and have been laughed at by people who thought I was joking about water going in and who would care about something like that. Well, they're supposed to care. And so I told them what rules applied to them and that they had to get somebody out there and that my next call was going to be to the state. And someone was out there. And so they will eventually respond. And then I'll also let you know who to call if the city's not responsive. So what are the rules? It sort of depends on what problem you have. They differ, the water rules, depending on where the water is and where it's going. And the responsibility is divided between cities, states, and tribes, and the federal government. It's further divided among and within agencies. So it can make it pretty hard to figure out who to call or who to complain to. But a good sort of rule of thumb is call a waterkeeper organization, call a coastkeeper organization. We'll tend to know what to do and can help with that. And if we can't help, we can tell you who to call. This link under here, this EPA, Cal EPA complaints, this is another good thing. This is a site I use too. So if you click on this link or even Google search Cal EPA complaint, there's a really good system there that's easy to understand, which is rare for EPA, Cal EPA websites. But you can say, okay, where do you live? What kind of problem do you have? And it's pictures. Is it water? Is it air? Is it toxics? Hazardous waste, solid waste, pesticides. You click on a picture, you can do a brief description, send your email, or do anonymously. And then if you have any photos, you can upload them. They will, based on what you say, they will make sure that day to get to the right agency and to the right person at that agency. And most of these agencies have a person semi-local. So they can be on a call that week with the appropriate person. If it's immediate, if it's really bad, they can be out there that day. So let's go to the next slide. So here's a brief thing on surface water. So this is generally what I do. So I do a lot of surface water problems. That's mostly stormwater problems. My business is really when it rains, what do companies and municipalities and construction sites do to make sure that creeks, bays, estuaries, and the ocean aren't closed for a long time, or there aren't mass die-offs. And there are a lot of rules about that. So let's go over, you've been walking around, it's a rainy day, or driving around, and you've observed cloudy water coming from a construction site going to a storm drain. And you're saying, this isn't right, I gotta do something about this. Well, there are different regulators who deal with that, starting all the way at the top, at the EPA, going down to the local level. Don't do anything with the EPA. So US EPA is not designed to do things at a parcel level. They are more programmatic. I don't call the state water board either. They have regulations and responsibilities that apply. They probably adopted the permit that would apply to that site, but a regional board is probably who you'd want to call. So the way that it's set up in California is EPA, let's take the Clean Water Act. EPA regulates the entire country through the Clean Water Act, water issues. California already had a system before the Clean Water Act was adopted, which was the state water, and it was the State Water Resources Control Board system. So there's one state agency or one state board within Cal EPA that deals with water quality and water issues, supply too. And under them are 9 regional boards. And there are a lot in Southern California. We're in all of them. And in Orange County, it's generally the Santa Ana Regional Water Quality Control Board. They're based in, not Santa Ana, they're based in the Inland Empire. But they have local staff members that do enforcement and permit writing, so they can actually be a good resource. You can say, hey, regional board, their website's online. Regional board, I'm seeing something, send somebody out here. They're not great, but they can tell you what to do. So you can say, they can tell you, take a photo, send it to me. And based on that, they might be able to speed up getting somebody out there. The city and the county watershed departments, those can be okay, but generally if it's a surface water issue and it's raining, they have a lot of other things going on and it's not a good time. Talking to a city is typically the best thing to do if it's a dry weather event. So you see sprinklers going all over the place, or you see somebody pressure washing a dump truck, and that's going into a storm drain. City, that would be okay. They could get out there. We do a lot of stuff with dump trucks and trash trucks, and that's a good thing. So if we can go on to the next slide. So with surface waters, yeah. So the Clean Water Act, sort of the overarching regulation nationally, and that will control the discharges from construction sites, industrial, municipal, some agricultural, generally large concentrated animal feeding operations are regulated through them. But it has to discharge to waters of the US for the Clean Water Act to apply. You might have seen that today or yesterday, the federal government did the single largest rollback of the Clean Water Act ever. So they finalized a rule, the EPA did, to restrict the waters of the United States. That's the extent of where the Clean Water Act applies, only to waters of the United States. So by rolling that back, there's much of the Southwest, and in some instances, entire states in the Southwest, that the argument goes might not have the Clean Water Act apply to them at all. Large portions of Southern California might lose Clean Water Act protection entirely. That would revert us back to what the state's regulations are, which is Porter-Cologne, which is not bad. And actually, our water laws, some of the issues with the Clean Water Act are based on California law back 50 years ago. But if you were to have Clean Water Act, and let's say you're in an urban area, you're not going to lose Clean Water Act protection if you're in an urban area. Those are regulated through what are called NPDES or NPDES permits, and you can find those online, and I'll tell you where. Those will regulate the time, the amount of pollutants that can be discharged. Think of a permit as a license. So just like you have a license to drive, the government can put limitations. They can say, you can't drive past 10 o'clock, or you can drive, but you have to have glasses, and they have to be prescription glasses. That's what these permits do. They are a license to pollute. They can say, you can only discharge this amount of copper into the waterway or radioactive material into a waterway. And if you're over that number, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're in violation. It means you have to do something to get yourself below the number. So it's not what's called a strict liability law for the most part. In some instances it is, but it's generally not. So there's a lot of nuance to complying with NPDES permits. In California, if you're in one of those new water bodies, areas that might not have Clean Water Act coverage anymore, you're not out entirely. The state still applies to you. So the state has what's called waste discharge regulations, WDRs, that are similar to a NIPD's permit. And in most instances, if someone gets a permit, they get both a NIPD's and a WDR in the same permit. This controls the discharge to surface waters that are waters of the state. So think of somewhere like the Mojave, right? The Mojave probably doesn't have NIPD's permits, but that doesn't mean that someone could pour barrels of mercury or gasoline into the Mojave River, of which there is a river out there. So there are still regulations. So don't think that I observed something, this is an entirely unregulated entity. The regulations apply whether they have a permit, something else, but it's almost no doubt they need something. So, and we can find that out. If we can go on to the next slide. Public resources, these are good hyperlinks to keep. So if you're wondering whether someone has a permit or whether somebody's permit is being violated, or hey, this place is pretty nasty, I wonder what they have to sample for, you can go to the SMARTS database. So I don't remember what it stands for really, but it's within the State Water Resources Control Board. It's like it's a surface, I don't know, some weird, they put words together to say SMARTS. So it's a database that you can click on and go to the public user icon, and you can search through addresses, water bodies, cities, names of the business, names of the parent company, anything. And it will pop up with a license number and an address, and then all the documents in the past few years that have been submitted for them. A few years ago, all reports had to be submitted electronically, which is great because now they're open to the public. Before it was complicated to get those records. So you can look to see what are the rules that apply to them? How are they complying with those rules? What are their regulatory documents that they have to prepare themselves say? When they collect stormwater samples, because if you're under the industrial permit, you need to collect 4 samples a year. And you need to sample for the pollutants associated with your pollution, your activities. You can see whether they're in compliance or not. A lot of times people are out of compliance and nobody knows about it. That's what Coastkeeper does, is try to get them into compliance. You can then look at the 303D list map. That's the link, the second link. That will tell you whether the water downstream from where you live or where you care about is so impaired because it has so many pollutants in it that you have to put it onto a special list, because it can't do everything that the water body historically could have done. So that, let's say people used to jet ski on it, but you can't jet ski on it anymore, because if you were to fall in and incidentally get some water in your mouth, you might get cancer, right? That's bad. And if the state knows that and the feds know it, it has to have a plan in order to restore the water body. That list map will take you to a map of all of the water bodies in the state, which are almost all the water bodies in the state, which are impaired for something. And finally, regional board websites, there's 9 of them. There is a lot, varying website qualities. Depending on where you live, it's generally the biggest waterway around you is the regional board. The LA regional board is LA River. Santa Ana is because of Santa Ana River. You can go through that. It'll be more local rules that apply to you. So let's go to groundwater. So with groundwater, the Clean Water Act does not apply to groundwater. So that is a state issue. That is not a federal issue for the most part, except when groundwater and surface water interface. And there are cases that say that, you know, you can't do indirectly what you can't do directly. So you couldn't be a facility and take a discharge pipe of hydrochloric acid and put it into the groundwater if you knew that the groundwater was connected with the stream 50 feet away. and you wouldn't have been able to discharge that acid directly to the creek, right? That's an actual similar case is going on right now before the Supreme Court, which is the County of Maui case, which deals very similar to an issue just like that, but with sewage, treated sewage. Keep a lookout for that, because it's going to have a really big influence on whether the Clean Water Act is going to be able to control the discharges of pollution to groundwater, when the person knows that the groundwater is linked to the surface water, because most of water is all linked somehow. And it's just groundwater in some instances is a flowing underground river. You can go to the GAMA website, Groundwater Ambient Monitoring Assessment, if you do have concerns about what the groundwater in your area is like. This interactive map should be able to tell you what the concerns are. And very particular, you'll generally see a lot of what are called LUSTs, leaky underground storage tanks. If you live near a gas station, you probably have a leaky underground storage tank and a petroleum plume or MTBE plume. It's very, very common. And so take a look at that. You can see what kind of groundwater issues you might have. It's important to know, because I know in Orange County, they're starting to close more and more wells because of diving plumes of chemicals that are impacting drinking water quality in the groundwater. And you can also on that website look at the USGS, US Geological Survey. And let's go to the next slide, drinking water. This is the last thing. If you have concerns about it and don't know what's in your water, go and look at the water district where you live, their drinking water info. They're required by law to give you a report every year about your drinking water quality and maximum contaminant levels that's in it. You can look at the GAMA and USGS data that we just talked about, and the Division of Water Quality, which is within the State Water Resources Control Board, which was recently put under them. They're getting better, and so you can take a look at that. One issue to remember, let's see, is that California can have stricter rules than the feds, and we do, on what are called maximum contaminant levels for things like perchlorate. I believe arsenic, our rules are stricter. So it's good to look at California's rules and not just the federal rules. And then what the issues generally are around here are perchlorates and then PFAS. If you've seen dark waters, that is a very serious issue in Southern California. There's a lot of PFAS in water. And you can check the service area where you live if you don't know in that next link. And finally, the last slide, as my time's expiring. The rule that would apply to drinking water is what's called the Safe Drinking Water Act. This is what you've seen with a lot of different facilities, like Flint, Michigan is dealing with this, but it only applies to public water systems in the US. And you might not have a public water system. So it doesn't cover private wells, bottled water, or facilities operating their own water system, which would be schools. So the Safe Drinking Water Act does not apply to schools, many office buildings, hospitals, or factories. And but it does require to establish national primary drinking water regulations for contaminants that may cause public health effects. Those can be found on the EPA and California website. And consult either us or Natural Resources Defense Council for more information. NRDC has been doing a lot of really excellent work on these issues in both in Newark and in Flint. And I think my time is done if there are any questions. Okay, so real quick, in the last minute I have, it looks like are people hosing down their sidewalks and driveways? Generally, these rules, if you're talking about sidewalks and driveways, a lot of these rules don't apply to residential areas. And so reporting that, it can be useful, but only if it's an abuse. If you see somebody dumping truckloads of water, then you should call. But if it's somebody washing their car, the city's not going to do anything about that. SGMA is different. So SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, is very important, but not generally something for individuals to do some work about. I can be back on another panel. I know Dean put some work together. I can be on another thing to talk about SGMA. And I don't know about glyphosate levels and whether California does test for that. I do not believe that there is an MCL for it. So, and it's 1:30, so I'm.
Yes, beautiful job. Thank you, Colin. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation, and I particularly liked that you focused on things activists could actually do to help improve, you know, sort of our little roving army of helpers to enforce things. People can see things and turn them in, and there's a lot of good information on what our audience members can do to help improve water quality. So
Well,
thank you so much for that great presentation.
Thank you for putting it together, and thank you for everybody joining, and have a happy Earth Day.
Well, thank you too.